I've seen startups building engineering team in-house, and it's not efficient. Even after 10 years in Singapore, I'm still surprised how fast those guys can go. You can chop off the time by 30 to 40% on your development process. In Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, they will all say, oh, Singapore's got it. If it fits what we need, then we'll buy it.
Welcome back to another episode of the GS MedTech Podcast, where I speak with founders and operators who help turn medical innovation into real-world impact. I'm Dame Medarski, and today's episode focuses on a topic that comes regularly in conversations with European MedTech founders: how to manufacture, scale, and globalize without losing speed or quality. Today, I'm joined by Jean-Luc Fringeli. Jean-Luc is the founder of MDS Plus, a company that helps European MedTech businesses move from prototype to production by combining European MedTech quality standards with Singapore's developed manufacturing ecosystem. Jean-Luc, welcome to the GS MedTech Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Dabi.
So to kick us off, before joining the conversation, you sent me an email, and your signature says alchemist/group director. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey and what originally drew you into founding MDS Plus, and maybe we can take it from there?
Yeah. So it has to do with my background. I used to work in Johnson & Johnson in supply chain and finance, for a tobacco company as well, in R&D, in manufacturing, quality and engineering in manufacturing. So my background is very diverse, and it's not only medtech, but it covers also some different industries. And I felt that now managing a business, providing services to other companies, you have to be very agile, not only being like a service provider, purely service provider, but you need to solve their problem also sometimes at the business level and find some different solutions. So how do you define this job there? So I thought alchemist, because like all the pieces, and then you could try to make it work somehow in the chemistry. That would be relevant actually for my title.
Thank you for that. And maybe to start digging into the topic of conversation, obviously you're supporting some companies into outsourcing manufacturing in Singapore and in Asia in particular. And at LSI USA, I was listening to EDB Singapore sharing a little bit more information about the ecosystem. And I mean, I was surprised to my knowledge, or to the lack of my knowledge, that there are many R&D centers already set up, over 35 manufacturing facilities that are supporting some global companies already in Singapore. But from your perspective, what does the medtech landscape in Singapore look like today, and what is it becoming? Why is it becoming such an important hub for medtech businesses?
Yeah, it's so. Going back maybe also to my background, I used to work in the US for 6 years, got an MBA as well there. And then obviously in Europe, I'm from Switzerland, so I got educated here in engineering. And then I spent the last 10 years in Singapore. So I get to know a lot of what's going on there. And Singapore is very unique in terms of the culture, working habits, very much aligned with the Western world. A lot of multinationals are implanted in Singapore, and they raise the level of engineering skill sets to a very high level. And I'm not talking about just medtech, but the overall engineering, let's say, skill sets are top notch. And this is quite unique in Asia, and because when you look at Malaysia, Indonesia, it's a lot about manufacturing, especially in Southeast Asia. China has a language barrier. Singapore is pure, the English is perfect. Everybody has been educated in English, but also Mandarin. So it's a very good entry point to other, China and different languages. So this creates by itself a very unique little bubble into Asia. And on top of that, Singapore government has quite a lot of funding to foster innovation and to push for medtech. Why medtech? Because a bit like I'm from Switzerland, so I understand that a small country, cannot survive if the education of the level is not high enough and there's no resources, right? Natural resources there. So they push the education, via the university, via multinationals, to get the top-notch engineers, but at the same time, they have to do high-level products. And the medical device field is exactly a good fit for what Singapore is doing. And the government is really like putting the horses in front of the car to move this industry ahead.
It's amazing, to be honest. I mean, for such a small country to have those 25 R&D centers and so many manufacturing facilities, but also I'm assuming the number of professionals that are involved in that industry is significantly higher based on the proportion of population as well.
Yes, correct. It's very vibrant. A lot of events are happening, and a lot of people are aware, or not even more aware, have deep knowledge of the medtech world, which makes, as I said, a vibrant ecosystem there, which is quite unique in Asia. It's not something that you can find anywhere. I've been many times to Japan, Korea. China is a bit different because they have their own very close culture. But at least in Southeast Asia, that's the only place you can find very good innovation in the medical field.
And something else that you've mentioned that stuck to my mind, diversity and the cultural background and the fact that it's much more internationalized as well. I guess it makes it a lot easier for someone from Europe to actually understand that culture and to be able to manage the relationship slightly easier than other Asian countries.
Correct. Your language, culture, as I mentioned before, working habits. This is very close to the European mindset, and there's also a lot of clients from the US coming. So the engineers I can find for my company in Singapore have always worked for Philips from Holland, from Apple in California, from Dyson in UK. They all have this kind of background, strong background, international background there. It's quite common.
Thank you for that. So if we take a European medtech startup, at what stage should a company seriously start considering Singapore for manufacturing or for scaling?
I kind of always have a bit the same answer to all the kind of the founders, especially on the startup environment. Develop your baby close to where you are, because you want to make sure that your baby is safe, it develops the right way, it speaks the right language or whatever, right? So, but once you are ready to let your baby walk and take the few steps by itself, then that's a moment you need to, let's say, outsource. Because if you start, I've seen startups building engineering team and in-house, and it's not efficient because you need to find the right people, and it's very diverse. You need quality firmware, mechanical. It's a whole group of people that need to have the right knowledge. So I feel that outsourcing is a lot more efficient. And I'm not talking about my business at this point, but as an ex-product owner doing the same thing. I always felt that it was the right way. But the timing is very difficult to understand exactly, because it depends also on the founder, not only the product maturity, but also the founder mindset has to be clear that, yes, I'm willing to let go some of my baby. I will check, but I will let it grow a little bit via the hands of somebody else.
Amazing. I love the analogy, and I'll continue with the same analogy. So let's say your baby is grown at a stage where you're thinking, okay, I might let go. What are the first practical steps a founder should take if they're thinking about manufacturing in Singapore?
Yeah. So I think the importance for European companies is to feel confident that when your baby goes away, it's going to be taken care with the right hands, right? And when it goes all the way to Asia, you're like, whoa, that's too far away. It's like, I'm not ready for that. But I got to say, because of this culture in Singapore, it's very close. Even if the distance is long, we get along very well in terms of working. I mentioned again working habit, but it's a very strong anchor. In any case, a startup founder has to find the right fit in terms of the supplier that will handle this baby. Could it be Germany? Could it be UK or anywhere in the world? That's the first step that you need to feel comfortable with the company you're dealing with. The second step is, how does it work? Comparing maybe the 2 or 3 vendors that you have and saying, okay, this one is based, 100 kilometers away from me. The other one is much further out. But what is the advantage? Based on my strategy, my business strategy, what are the important elements that I need to consider to select this vendor. And that's the key point on saying, yes, I should go to Singapore or I should stay local. And there's pros and cons on both things.
Thank you. And maybe can we flip it the other way around? What are the common mistakes that maybe European companies and founders are doing or should be avoiding when they decide to manufacture in Singapore or in Asia?
I think they get attracted very easily by contract manufacturers that will say, I have an R&D team. It's like, oh, great. But what we call R&D, because I assume that when you go to Asia, your product is not fully ready, fully qualified. You still need to do some design for manufacturing. You still need to do some development. But I'm not talking about the prototyping phase. In between, right? This engineering phase. And this is where you may get into trouble. And I've seen that a few times. The CM have a very good way of showing you that they can do marvelous things. Yes, in terms of the manufacturing, but don't forget that R&D engineers are very different from manufacturing in terms of the mindset. Manufacturers are cost-driven, efficiency. So if you understand that, it's very different from developing a product where you need to have the best product in the hands of your user. So there's this common mistake that I've seen a few times where, I discussed yesterday in Medica with one of those founders, and she basically took a contract manufacturers in China, and there is a lot of issues because there was the missing gap between translating what was done in Europe versus what was done in China.
So almost you need to either have someone internally who knows and understands a little bit more about those intricacies or engage with someone that can help you to understand those potential challenges.
Correct. So the model that I've seen that works quite well is either you have somebody who knows how to do that, has done it a few times, and it's part of your team. So, okay, you can handle. The second option is what we offer in Singapore. It's an entry point to Asia. We are taking the language of the founder, the technical team, and translating that into a manufacturing language. And I'm not talking about just English to Mandarin. I'm talking to a translation of different mindset and requirements. So we've done that a lot of times, and we get actually paid today just to do this translation by some companies in Holland, for example. And all they want is this. Why? Because the communication doesn't work so well. But it has to do the mindset. The mindset between the two companies have to be bridged at some point, and this is what we provide.
I think it's very much needed, and especially when there is a lack of awareness. And to me, where I was trying to understand a little bit more and to figure out is obviously the ISO 13485 standards, the European manufacturing standards. How is that set up when you're actually outsourcing it to Singapore?
So Singapore is the top-notch quality country. We have, for example, the IP World Organization. So IP protection is super high, on par with Europe. Free trade agreement with Europe, European countries on the same level in terms also on the mindset of the quality. ISO standards are, you can find a lot of ISO standards in companies, but maybe the implementation is not there yet, right? So you have the certificate, but there's the execution behind that is important. Singapore doesn't have this problem. I've never seen such a problem in Singapore where you go to a manufacturer and you wonder how they can get this certificate. And that's the beauty of this region. Not only Singapore, but south of Malaysia, a region called Johor Bahru, they also have a very high quality standard. Why? Because it's monitored by Singapore people.
So operational efficiency is one significant advantage, I'm assuming. Are there any advantages in terms of cost, speed when you're manufacturing in Singapore?
Yep. So the cost comes not exactly from Singapore itself, but because we have a supply chain that is very established around Singapore. And then it goes all the way to China. It's not only Malaysia and Indonesia next door, but you can find PCBAs manufacturers, mold makers, stamping fabricator. I mean, you have like a lot of vendors that are around. And they are not all medtech related, but they provide the components that will go into a medtech equipment. So the assembly process and the incoming inspection and the outgoing inspection in terms of the quality process and so on is very important. And this can be done in Singapore or the surrounding of Singapore. So there is definitely a cost advantage because those guys are very established and they are usually low cost because of the labor cost in this region. But without bypassing the quality. That's what I really like about this region, is they still have the standard of meeting the quality at the product level, but using a supply chain that is low cost. One thing I want to mention that is also the speed. And this is even after 10 years in Singapore, I'm still surprised how fast those guys can go. Right? And if you compare with European standards in terms of timeline, you can chop off the time by 30 to 40% on your development process. And there's no magic around that. People work harder. They have less vacation. 5 o'clock on Friday, nobody works in Europe. Whereas like they're still grinding and sending emails and even Saturdays. And so there's no miracle, right? These are not magicians. They're just working harder and they are hungrier. So that it's an advantage also to be in this region for them.
And it's a good advantage for a European medtech business to benefit off, obviously, by maximizing on that ability to just very quickly, very easily utilize those operational efficiencies, speed, and costs as well. And maybe putting you on the spot, you've mentioned free trade agreements as well. Can you elaborate a little bit more? What's the current situation? What's the current agreement between Singapore and European Union?
It's quite straightforward. There's no tax. So whatever you buy from Singapore, and then there's no added tax in between the countries. I do believe that you have to pay VAT when it comes to Europe, but in terms of between the two countries, it's there's nothing else. But I'm not 100% familiar with that. We have a team actually taking care of that on our side.
So that's adding to the advantage, to be honest, on top of everything else. And it's very good to hear as well. And maybe to wrap this up, you've mentioned south of Malaysia and good manufacturing capability there. What's your awareness of other countries that are maybe developing in the region and that are potentially becoming of interest to European medtech companies?
I would say Thailand is giving a strong push.
Mm-hmm.
But Thailand is okay. If I compare about the region, right? If I step back a little bit and I look at the whole Asia, so China is a standalone element there. Japan has its own innovation, but very slow and very, I would say, groundbreaking in innovation. They come up with some amazing breakthrough innovation there. Korea is halfway between. All the other countries will just be following what's happening. There is, except Singapore, right? But the other countries there, I would say Thailand is a good hub to eventually consider manufacturing. It is still a bit behind. So if you have like a class 1 medical product, Thailand might be a good fit. But if you go to class 2, even class 2A, I would just like question a bit, I would say not the efficiency and the operations there, but the quality level and the mindset. Because, when you deal with a contract manufacturer, the director will give you a nice speech, right? But it cascades down to the manager, to the technician, and then to the operators. If the operators doesn't think that quality should be at this level, then your product may not be at this level.
You're absolutely right. It needs to trickle down through way too many steps before it gets to the actual person that's influencing that with their own activities.
Correct, yeah.
So transitioning on to MDS Plus, I think it's important for us to cover a little bit more. You touched base on supporting some businesses in terms of the communication between them and Singapore and making sure that that's aligned. And at the same time, you've mentioned that you have a team that's maybe focusing on free trade and understanding a little bit of that as well. But maybe you can paint us the large picture of how does MDS typically support a European medtech company from your own perspective.
Yes. So we put in place because we discussed a lot with our clients and potential clients, and we used to be just an R&D company, but based close to manufacturers. So what we've done in the past years, it was to bring our design to manufacturers, and then we would help actually the startups or the European SMEs to manufacture in Asia. But what we notice is in Asia, there's a lot of high volume manufacturing. And when I say high volume, it's a lot higher than what you can find in Europe. So we have put in place a intermediate step, which our R&D team will provide manufacturing services in-house so that we can bridge then later, if the company is successful and needs to scale up the manufacturing, then we can go to the big boys, which will have like 200 employees working on the line and making super efficient products at a low cost and super high speed. But in between, we have this kind of offering where we do design work, and then we bring it to our manufacturing first, where you need 50 units for FDA submission, doing some testing, some user testing, some whatever you need in terms of your product strategy. This is what we are solving in terms of the problem for the medtech world, which today is very segregated between R&D. Then you go to the next stage, and then if you scale up, then you need to go against to the next stage, which is very inefficient when you talk about the big picture there. So that's a unique offering that we have within our company.
Okay. So would you say that majority of your customers would be at that initial stage, and then you translate them, if they're successful, onto connecting them with bigger manufacturers? Or would you onboard someone that has maybe passed this stage of initially developing and manufacturing their 50 devices, and then needs to start thinking about the bigger volume that potentially they might require?
We typically, because we add a lot of value when we are at the earlier stage, because we are R&D people with some manufacturing added value. If you're just looking for a contract manufacturer, then we would be very happy to make introductions and then help actually qualify the production or do the design transfer or even manage the supplier. We've done that many times. I take an example. There's a company in Munich. It's a combination product, so drug and a device, and we handle all the manufacturing of the device on their behalf. So that's also doable, but it's a very different business model, I would say. And startups usually are not at this stage. So it fits very well the world of the SMEs. But for the startups, the earliest stage is slightly better. Then we can really drive the efficiency and the cost down and the speed to go to manufacturing with the experience that we have.
And if some of the founders that would be listening to the podcast are wondering what are the typical timelines from initial engagement with you to maybe seeing some production runs, what would that look like?
Yeah, so I have a standard timeline. Is that okay? I show you.
More than happy to have a look at that. Might visualize everything a lot better as well.
Yes, let me go full screen. This is usually a typical project plan. And so before we go into the details of that, it looks busy, but it's quite simple. There's a lot of discussion that will happen with me and my partners and the engineers to understand really what the strategy of the company is and what the product is about. It's a groundwork that we do anyhow before starting a project. Here it's a project plan that goes into the full-fledged development from, and I take my pointer, from what we call EVT, but it's like the engineering validation. For any European company, I strongly advise to do this first phase here locally within your team, with some suppliers over here. There's very good R&D companies in Europe. So I think that's the one where you develop your baby. You don't make it walk yet, right?
Yeah.
Then when you get to the design input requirement at this stage, this is where you know what you're gonna do, right? So you can let your baby go. And going all the way to Singapore makes a lot of sense at this point for speed reasons, because here a typical timeline within 7 or 8 months you can have a fully verified design, and here it's the typical kind of class 2A product. If it's more complicated, of course, it's going to take more time.
Yeah.
Shorter than that, it might be difficult because there's a lot of documentation in the medical field. But I would say that would be the sweet spot for us for the regulatory submission here. But
Mhm.
this plan shows two ways. One is that we do the DV build without having to tool up the parts. And here I'm referring to injection plastic molding, a typical element that is key for many of the medical products. And then we don't go into tooling. So we wait for the submission to be approved so that we open tools later, and then we qualify the production and we go to manufacturing. The other way is to actually, and it depends on many factors, such as the design maturity, the risk, the business risk that we want to take, as well as the strategy of the company. There's another way is to open up the tools a bit earlier, which brings this phase that is after regulatory submission
Yeah.
earlier. And then we go through the same process of going through design verification. It takes a bit more time, but after the approval, then it's almost ready to go to manufacturing right away. It depends on the strategy, but this is typically the timeline that you can expect by going to Asia. It's like from the design input requirement or concept is frozen. You go
Mhm.
all the way to manufacturing with 12 to 15 months. However, you need to factor in the FDA or CE approval, which is, usually takes a lot longer than what I mentioned on this little
Yeah.
graphic here.
And I'm assuming that dictates then the need for the speed up process after the design process and verification is complete as well.
Correct, exactly. If we so in the discussions with investors, typically like investors would put some money for a certain plan. So the discussion would say, okay, we need to go very fast into regulatory submission, or we are sure that it's gonna go on, and then it's gonna be a long-term investment. Then we go to the second route. So again, it's a lot of discussions at this point, and then we put a lot of details into the decision here to be made, so that the founders or the technical team can provide the right decision at this point.
But it's also beneficial because they have a little bit of a flexibility in terms of the decision that they need to make that's dictated maybe by internal processes as well.
Correct. Exactly. It's important because every single client on our side, every single client is different, and a different vision of their business.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And you've mentioned investors and involving investors in this as well, which brings me to a question regarding maybe some understanding from a founder's perspective, how much this might cost. Bearing in mind that a lot of them would be structuring rounds well in advance of needing to utilize your services? Are they able to come to you and say, this is what our plans are, this is what we're planning to do, we're structuring our round at the moment, and we're considering how much money we will need for this? Are you able to provide them with some indication as to how much that will cost so that they know how much to ask for?
I'm super happy to do these kind of things. I'm, by the way, a mentor in ETH Zurich and EPFL in Switzerland. And
Yeah.
my job is actually to educate those researchers and clinicians and doctors so that they understand actually what would be the next steps, because they all think that once they have a proof of concept, just, within seconds I have manufacturing. It doesn't happen this way, right? So
Yeah.
this is my added value at this point, and I'm happy to answer any type of questions at any point without any engagement, because it's my pleasure to provide my knowledge on that.
Oh, thank you. And obviously, one of the reasons why we're having this podcast is to share a little bit more information, so that some founders can find this and hopefully reach out afterwards to be able to benefit from even additional details as well. And touching maybe upon a last piece of the process that you undertake, what are maybe some common pitfalls you encounter whenever you start dealing with a business? What should they be anticipating that might go wrong before they start speaking with you that potentially can influence the process?
In terms of the product development or okay. I think there's a lot of founders coming to us with a certain attitude that will say, it works. My piece of cable, tubes and whatever, it works. So you just get that, you put a shell around, and then a couple of buttons, and it's product. And you're like, well, okay, it's not because it works only one time in the lab that it works. Our duty is to translate that into something that works 99.999% of the time. And the client will not understand that it doesn't work. It's meant to be this way, man. So there is sometimes a gap. I think it comes again via the education or the level of awareness, not education, but awareness that there is more work to be done after coming up with some magic that will happen in a lab. And that's the common pitfall. And so when we put up a quote and we say we have to do this before starting the real design verification, they're like, why? It's like, yeah, but you take off the shelf things, but at the end, if you want a product that costs $50, then if you take just those two components, it's already $100. So you need to redesign. So there's a lot of talk like that. But again, it's done via the quote at the quotation level.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just the expectation alignment that needs to happen at this stage. Not a big deal, but it takes sometimes a bit of frustration out of some people. Then if they don't trust us, they go to somebody else. You get the same speech, right?
Yeah. And when you get the same feedback, you understand that maybe there is something internally that needs to change in the thinking rather than actually finding fault outside
Yeah.
of it. And I think it's maybe a learning experience and a curve for a lot of founders as well. After all, some of them, or 70% of them, will be engineers, and that's their baby, and that's something that they have developed themselves. So there is a bit of pride, I'm assuming, into what they have done. But ultimately, a good leader understands that they need to listen and absorb a lot more rather than just focus on what they know, because ultimately that's not how companies or people grow.
Correct. Just between you and me, I know a lot of people will listen, but doctors of a certain age typically act like with a lot of ego, and they don't want to listen too much. So those are I need to spend a bit more time to raise the level of awareness on that.
I understand that. And obviously, you've been doing this for a while. Maybe you can share with us, even anonymously, some examples of European companies that have successfully scaled through your services and the impact that has had on those
Yes.
businesses.
Yeah. So I mentioned before a combination product. That would be a very good example, and it's not so complex. I would say, like, if it's really highly complex, then you can stay around you because you have to hold the hands of your baby along the way for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Because of the complexity. But if it's too simple, then you go to anywhere, even China, they will make it happen. So we are right in between that threshold. So that's the sweet spot. But also, like, when it gets to something that is complex and needs a lot of time to build. If I take, for example, a PCR test analyzer, IVD device, right? There is a lot of heating, cooling, movement, suction, adding some elements. It's almost a kind of a mini robot in a certain way, but it has to be on maybe in a lab, but not taking so much space on a table. Those devices are very well suited for business because it's highly complex, and because of the labor costs in Malaysia, then we are able to build this in a very efficient manner. And usually, like, those businesses, the strategy is not to sell these units. So they don't make a profit on those units. They make profit on their cartridge. So they want to focus on their cartridge, but they want just like almost like a side business. They don't care too much. So this is where we can take on this kind of things. So I would say those products, class 2A, class 2B, is the right sweet spot for.
I appreciate that very much. And obviously, you very kindly outlined many of the benefits and important things to consider from a founding perspective. But to summarize it for a European founder listening today, what is the single most important thing that they should know before deciding to manufacture in Singapore?
I think when we spoke about cost, speed, and labor and all this kind of stuff and quality level. I think I'm not going to restate that. What I
Mm,
want to emphasize maybe here is the ecosystem that is in Singapore. Maybe I kind of bypass a bit of that at the beginning. There is a lot of hospitals that want to be the first to adopt new products because they want to claim they are innovative. So they are very supportive. There are not thousands of them, but a few of them that are very supportive. So when they are get involved somehow, either in the clinical trial and so on, they will be the first one to adopt this product. What does that mean? Because it's a small market in Singapore. What is it means that actually when Singapore hospitals say, yes, we have this product, and then you can go out and then start marketing that to other countries in Malaysia,
mm,
Singapore is like a beacon. It radiates actually the light everywhere. So Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, they will all say, oh, Singapore's got it. Okay, we are if it fits what we need, then we'll buy it. The regulatory approval is much faster. And it's the beauty of Singapore. It's not only like just manufacturing, but you also have access to the biggest market in the world, which is Asia.
mm,
So some products you don't care, right? This may not be suitable, but some other products will be a really good fit actually to start in Asia versus going to CE mark and FDA, which takes so much time and so much effort. Okay, there is the reimbursement, there's all the good things in there, right? But speed is essential for startups. Why not
yeah.
starting in Asia and moving then or doing things in parallel with the all the regulatory and the sales and marketing in different countries? That's kind of my take. And if I may, just Singapore offers quite a few interesting grants for this stage. So that might help actually relieve. It will not be the one that will be the source of funding from for your startup, but we are able in Singapore to reduce the cost of your development with the help of Singapore if it fits the Singapore strategy as a whole. So there's also opportunities there.
I fully agree with that. And I think maybe there is a bit of a change in opinion and strategy in the medtech world. It feels like there are beginnings of putting Asia on companies' radar because, after all, it's the biggest market. Half of the population lives in Asia. And up to now, there has been more or less a physical or mental barrier that we don't understand that culture and we are not necessarily involved there. But from what I'm seeing this year in particular, it feels like there is a bit of a change of mentality and potentially beginnings of considerations and thinking a little bit more that maybe rather than CE marking a product and going through what was a hurdle with notified bodies 2 or 3 years ago, you go through a simpler regulatory process in Asia and then consider that as your stepping stone rather than somewhere in Europe initially.
Exactly, exactly. I perfectly concur with that. And I've seen the same trend from my eyes from Switzerland too.
Yeah. And maybe to wrap this up, we spoke a lot about Singapore and your passion about the country is very evident, I have to say, about the country and the people and obviously everything that we've spoken about. Thinking about the future and maybe moving forward, where do you see Singapore heading in terms of the medtech industry?
I think now I see the government in Singapore pushing a lot for the class 3 medical products because, China is getting higher and higher in terms of the risk or classification of the devices. 10 years ago, class 1 would be a challenge for Chinese. Now they do class 2A, class 2B, class 3, they are component suppliers already. But Singapore needs to elevate their level. So there's a strong push from the government that there's a scheme now where they incentivize companies with a huge cutoff on the development cost if manufacturing happens in Singapore. And they are targeting, for example, imaging companies and MRI type of level of or implantable devices. So the trend is starting in Singapore. I wouldn't say it's mature yet. I wouldn't close my eyes and say, yeah, we can do this in Singapore yet, but it's going there. And knowing the Singapore government is very different from, let's say, governments in the Western countries because they have a 25-year plan. It's very much like China. So they put up a 5-year disclosed plan, but in their head, they even have a 50-year plan. So they know where they're going. If they are still starting a trend, they will achieve it, no matter what. So expect that in 10 years, there will be a lot of class 3 medical products, top-notch manufacturers in Singapore.
And that's a very good closing statement, I have to say, to our conversation. Jean-Luc, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for dedicating the time and sharing with us. And I think for anyone that's interested to learn more about your services and your business, your website is mdsplus.com. So
Yep.
they can reach out through the website.
Hey, happy that you just ping me on LinkedIn, and then any question if I'm capable of answering, I would be happy to do so.
Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dami.